Vidya Krishnan is going to join us next. We're going to continue with some really beautiful insights. I think you'll find you agree with me when you hear Vidya explain what she does and how she thinks about it. She is the Global Chief Learning Officer at Ericsson, a company with 95,000 employees. So she's responsible for helping all those 95,000 people figure out how to grow. And what does that mean in this world? And how does that impact the outside of Ericsson as well as the inside and their customers? So maybe Vidya, welcome, first of all. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
What is your mandate as head of learning at Ericsson? What does that mean?
I think what it means now is that we have to create conditions for our 95,000 people in 180 countries to change themselves. And that means helping them build their skill sets, but also their mindsets, and to do that in a way that allows them to create value for our customers and society, but also value for themselves in the form of resilience, knowing we can become anything we need, and belonging, knowing that we can be together with one another as one company. So I think that's our mandate. It means a million different things, but it means one thing at the same time. That's the big thing.
I mean, you have a fairly visionary, big picture approach to doing that. Talk about sort of some of the values you bring to that process.
I think the first value is just how education, no matter what else changes in our world, the one thing that doesn't change is education is one of those rare things that once you have it, no one can take it away from you. And so we know that it is one of the most powerful things people could do for themselves and people could do for one another. And I always say, with all the connections there are in the world, learning is right up there with love. It's one of the most empowering, enabling things there could be. So I think that is something that creates value for ourselves. But we also recognize that as we learn as a company, this is the thing that allows us to innovate and to shape the future. And it's the thing that empowers us to create and co-create an intelligent world, a sustainable world, and more than ever, a connected world. So I think we're very clear that there's zero tolerance for zero learning at Ericsson. And the reason is the value of learning is that it empowers us in that kind of world. And by doing that, it also helps us change the world because we can use the technology we create for good.
So, zero tolerance for zero learning. So in other words, if you're not learning, you shouldn't hang around. Is that the way you think of it?
I think we believe, and I'm proud to say that, I think every one of us here believes that zero tolerance for zero learning. What we really mean is it's not okay to not be learning. We should never settle for that. It means the work's not done. It means that we're not done. And it's not something that we can ever accept. And I'm, again, proud to say that in this crazy year, no matter how busy people are, they know that they can't afford not to make time to learn. And they're doing it. We're making time to learn. We're making time to teach. We're making time to do it together. And it's not easy. But zero tolerance for zero learning means we know we have no choice. We have to learn our way into a better future. And the only way we're going to have the skill sets and the mindsets to solve some of these huge problems that matter is by making learning the priority that it is.
And I know you talk also about making learning easy. And that's part of the way that you kind of challenge yourself to achieve your success in your job. Talk about how you do that and some of the what's thinking that you've evolved around that process, because I think it applies to all of our organizations. You've clearly thought about it a lot. I'd like everyone to hear you describe the way you think about it.
Sure, thank you. I think when we talk about creating those conditions for people to change their skill sets and their mindsets, we really come at it in three ways. One is the ecosystem of learning. And the job of that ecosystem is to make learning easy. And we know it's hard to make learning easy, but what that means to us is that learning should find you. It's not just that you should find learning, and that our systems should be intelligent enough and convenient and simplified enough and personalized enough to know you, to know your progression, your momentum, and to help put you in the critical path of not just skills and not just experiences, but other people who can help you with what you need to grow, not just grow in areas where you feel you're weak, but to take your strengths and use them to shine. That for us is the ecosystem, and making learning easy is really about designing that ecosystem in a really thoughtful way so that we're harnessing the latest technology, we're harnessing the ability of AI combined with human intelligence to be able to visualize people's journeys, and we're making it faster for them to be found by learning, not just for them to go constantly hunting for it. So for us, that's the ecosystem of making learning easy. The other thing though for us is the culture system. And that is about making learning a habit that matters. And that's all about putting our people on the move, making sure they know that one of the most powerful ways to grow their skills is through what they work on, through opportunities. Opportunities that build skills, opportunities where they're learning, but also opportunities where they're teaching others. Because that giving is one of the most powerful ways of learning, and it's one of the most powerful multipliers of taking people with us. So our culture system valuing matching people not just to skills, but matching them to opportunities, and creating a learning culture by having a teaching culture. And the third thing for us really is about learning should drive our business. And that is our business system, making sure that we are upskilling and reskilling our people in critical areas that are going to completely move our business forward, and do that in a way that allows them to become something new all the time. For us, that's about the triple bottom line. We have to create, kind of sustainable financial success for our customers and for our employees, but it's also about creating a deep sense of belonging for our people. And it's also about creating a sustainable societal impact. So when we say, learning should drive the business forward, we're really thinking about that triple bottom line.
Right, and I mean, it's interesting that you think about that, trying to help your customers achieve the triple bottom line too. But I want to go back to this, when you talk about this idea of helping others learn and the culture, I know you have a concept of an empathy engine, which is, I'd like you to roll that in here and talk about that, because empathy has come up at this conference quite a few times already. And I think it's an important thing to elaborate at every possible opportunity. So how do you think about it in this work?
Yeah, definitely. When we go to the ecosystem, it's easy to take a technological based view of an ecosystem, but no matter how fancy that technology is, at the end of the day, people learn with other people, people learn from other people. And the highest aim of any platform, any ecosystem, is to be an empathy engine. And we say that very deliberately because learning increasingly is about community. Community is increasingly about connection. And that connection requires that you have one of the most important skills you can possibly have is the empathy to understand the cognitive diversity that's all around you. But it is not enough to have that empathy. You need to have it at scale. And that's where the engine part comes in. The technology is meant to scale the ability that we create within our company to have, foster, and grow empathy. And also the other part of engineering it is to make sure it's not something that's accidental, that it's super deliberate by design, that our learning interactions allow people to discover one another and to build a greater sense of empathy for one another. And that's why we say our ecosystem's highest purpose is actually to be that empathy engine.
Okay, there's so many things I want to talk about and want to fit in our remaining time. I mean, we want to get to 5G and how that dovetails with this, definitely. I want and your personal journey is worth just mentioning, because you are a trained engineer who came from a family of engineers, where you were not discouraged because you were a woman, which is really important, I think, in your own mindset. But this, and I'm just throwing that in quickly so we don't have to dwell on it, but your journey is amazing. You came through a customer education, and now you're doing an education of all the employees. But the thing I think would be especially useful for the audience is for you to talk about some of the techniques concretely that you've learned you need to do inside Ericsson to manifest these really beautiful values you've articulated in concrete learning systems. What are some specific things you're doing that are working?
I think one of the most important is the architecture of it, to think very, very deliberately about the design of our architecture and to use experience-driven algorithms, design thinking, and empathy once again in building things not based on process, but based on, and I think I heard Tressa say it in the earlier segment, based on outcomes. People, policies, decisions, creating outcomes. That's exactly what we're doing. So for us, architecting the ecosystem and thinking about the intersections. Let's face it, the hardest parts of any technology are the parts where it has to interact with other technology. You get that right, and you create something pretty magical at those intersections, at those APIs. So we are being extremely, I think, meticulous and deliberate about designing the architecture. But I think the other part, which is maybe even counterintuitive to what I just said, is the experimentation. This is not something where we can take the luxury of having a lot of time to do something linearly and get it right. It is all about making experiments, disciplined, rigorous experiments, trying this, trying that, seeing what works, A/B testing, being data-driven, and using that to be courageous about the decisions that we do make. So I think that is extremely tactical for us. It's about also bringing together the right people. I think very often when we build these things, we tend to think we need to collect all the experts. And it's true that we do, but there's another group of stakeholders that we have to gather with equal importance. And those are the people who have to live with the thing we put out there, the people who will be touched by it, the people who will live on it. And so we have to make sure we bring both groups of people together when we're building each design and decision of that ecosystem, the people who know about this stuff and the people who don't know anything about this stuff, but are the ones who have to live with it, and make sure that they are both having equal choice and voice in how we technologically design the platforms. I think the other thing we have to do is make sure that we all speak the same language of skills in our company. For many companies, I think we struggle with this, that different jobs, different roles are expressed in different terms, which makes it so hard for people to move. Like you said, in my personal journey, it's been characterized by this crazy zigzag of 4 careers behind me and hopefully 4 careers ahead of me at least. But that was all about seeing what skills were of interest to me, where I had my passion, and then building the competence later. Quite frankly, it was always about being led by curiosity and interest, and then trying to become good at something that I had already decided mattered to me. And doing that means you've got to have a strong taxonomy, a language of skills that just makes mobility much easier. So I think those are some of the really pragmatic ways in our design and our assembling of teams that we are trying to be very deliberate, but also very empathetic about how we're building our ecosystem.
Okay, we've got some great questions from some of our friends and members, but before we get to those, and we may not have time because I really want to make sure we talk about 5G, because Ericsson is one of the world's primary architects of the incipient 5G ecosystem we're all going to be living in. And I know first of all, maybe you could just talk a little bit about the importance of 5G in general, but
Yeah.
also what does it do to change the architecture of learning and education in your view?
Absolutely. I think for us, 5G, we always say it's the next thing that changes everything. And it's really more than one thing. It's enabling a speed, reliable broadband connection that can make immersive learning much more human, even as it becomes much more digital. And I think this is the watershed moment for virtual education, that it can become so digital and not lose its humanity, but actually be the thing that creates the ability to have a virtual village, to have this democratized access to learning that can bring people together. It takes a village to raise a learner, and with 5G you can create a village, a digital village that can bring together a really powerful set of people, community, content, resources to transform education. I think it can also allow us to take things like the massive Internet of Things and combine sensors and sensor intelligence with human intelligence, so that now when we look at our students in a virtual setting, we don't just see their full, beautiful humanity, we also see the insights about maybe what their learning needs are, maybe things that they might be shy to express or don't know how to express. We can see their interest, their profile. We're able to help them and they can see ours. And students are able to teach one another, and not just the teacher as a sage on the stage, but rather be a sort of digital guide at your side. So I think in those ways, 5G truly has this power to transform how education happens, to make an internet of senses where human skills are being augmented. We have holographic capabilities that this technology can support. And I think it will be game-changing, but more than game-changing, what it really needs to be is super empowering and equitable for all of the students in the world.
Wow, okay. And obviously that brings up the question of the analytics that you have to use in order to take advantage of
Yeah.
all this new data that's available that's going to contextualize things, which does sort of allow me, if I can definitely do this, to fold in the question from Robert Joseph. I don't know if you could see it on your screen, but he was asking how you measure and show ROI, which is also very connected to the analytics question. But given that clearly Ericsson devotes a lot of resources to this learning process, how do you justify all that?
Sure, it's a great question, and I think it's the quintessential question we're always trying to answer. We sometimes say that learning is like oxygen, it's vital, but it's not always visible. And analytics is a powerful way to make it visible. It can show us, and I think sometimes when we think about ROI, we think about the finality of something. It's finished, what did it return, as a static thing. But I think actually we need to think about, I think it was Accenture that coined the phrase ROL, return on learning. And it is not such a static thing. It's basically saying the productivity curve of a person and of a team changes its shape when you create more effective learning conditions and skill journeys for that team. And when it changes shape, that's delivering value. That's delivering all kinds of value, triple bottom line value. And so the return on learning can be measured definitely through the traditional consumption metrics, how many people took it, how many people finished it. And that will always be an important measure, but it's never going to be an adequate one. The real measure is, what does it do for skill shifting the workforce? Because our businesses that we know get measured on all of the traditional metrics that we look at when we look at a profit and loss sheet also increasingly need to measure skill shift as an objective, as a business result, because that skill shift in the workforce really determines whether this business is positioned to deliver future value. And so I think ROI needs to kind of pivot to be ROL, and ROL has to be measured really in business indicators, which are not just about productivity, but about how we have changed the composition of the workforce. How have you taken a team with an average level of 3 in this skill to having an average level of 8? Because this skill is the thing that's necessary to deliver value for our customers. So I think we have to think about that differently. We have to use the power of analytics, not just this retroactive way of like, what did it return, but in a predictive way. What is it going to promise? Where should we be focusing? What is our skill momentum? What direction should we be pointing in? If I take the data that's in my sales pipeline and I mix it together with the strengths of a team, what does that tell me about where I need to build my strengths even further to shine? And where does it tell me I have maybe fatal flaws or gaps that I really do have to address in order to do the right thing? So I think analytics also makes me feel we're going to see a huge shift from sort of retroactive learning measurement to predictive sensing and guiding on what skills matter, what momentum matters, and whether we're getting it right when it comes to skill shifting our teams.
And again, the quantity of data that's going to be available in this new 5G era is going to make all that challenging, but ultimately more possible, right?
Yeah.
I want to get one last question here, which is a great question from somebody who we know well, John Madison. He asked you to elaborate on the architecture of an empathy engine, and specifically, have you studied how to build an empathy engine that can survive leadership that does not have a lot of sympathy, as he puts it? Or, I mean, obviously, a lot of us work in organizations where the leaders are not modeling empathy as much as maybe we would like. Can you still have an empathy engine as part of that sort of culture?
I think definitely an enterprise where leadership is not modeling empathy has much deeper risks than not having the skills. I think they are in a much more dangerous position than they probably realize. But I think it's a very valid question. Again, metrics matter when they're the right metrics for what matters. And today, I find it that, when it comes to our learning ecosystem, we haven't yet agreed as an industry on a language of metrics that really matter for showing the skill progression of a company or of an individual. And so to the question he asked about what should the architecture be, I think one of the most important parts of the architecture is to be able to visualize and show skill progression. and to show the correlation between skill progression or lack of skill progression and business results. Because I think when you do that, and then you hold leaders accountable the same way they already know they're accountable for business results. What they don't always consistently see is how influential the skill shift or lack of skill shift is to business results they have or business results they wish they had.
Wow.
And when your architecture can visualize that and make that correlation so unmistakable, I think it becomes a little bit of a self-healing process that leaders who don't get it aren't going to get it and don't get to stay. And
Wow.
the ones that stay are the ones that are leaders who are learning drivers, who can see the virtuous cycle and can see the unmistakable collaboration and correlation from people who model learning and make it a priority, make it a team sport, and leaders as teachers and coaches to leaders who have great business outcomes. It's the same thing we know already about diversity. It's a business advantage in addition to everything else. And leaders who don't think it is a business advantage are leaders who aren't going to be leaders much longer.
Wow. And well, that actually answers one of the other questions that somebody asked that I didn't have time to direct toward you. Well, you know, every organization would be blessed to have someone like you within it. So I really think you do have a visionary approach to this process. And I unfortunately don't think that many companies have people at your senior level thinking in these terms. So it's one of the reasons we love Ericsson. We love working with Ericsson. And also it's probably one of the reasons Ericsson has succeeded in evolving technology so consistently, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, you know, as one of the primary technological drivers of the world we live in. So thank you, Vidya, so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I feel fortunate to be part of a company that has so many people who care so deeply about the future. So thank you.
Thanks again.